Hey guys, JD Vance here. I'm out on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, and I've heard from a lot of people that they're so frustrated, as I am, with the fact that Merrick Garland has used the Department of Justice for politics instead of law. And I think it's time we stop just whining about this problem and debating this problem and actually do something about it. So I've announced today that I will be holding all Department of Justice nominees that Merrick Garland will use, if confirmed, not to enforce the law impartially, which is his duty, but clearly to harass his political opponents. I think that we have to grind this department to a halt until Merrick Garland promises to do his job and stop going after his political opponents. Donald Trump is just one and in the most recent example of the fact that Merrick Garland uses his department for political purposes. We have Catholic fathers harassed for their pro-life activism. We, of course, have violent criminals walking the streets after the 2020 summer of riots. And if you're letting the violent criminals go free and you're harassing Christian parents for their political activism, you're not engaged in justice, you're engaged in politics. Let's be honest about that fact, and let's make this department work a little bit more slowly until Merrick Garland changes course and actually does his job the right way. Thanks, guys.
Ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 370 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 370 to constitute the majority party's membership on certain committees for the 118th Congress or until their successors are chosen.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The junior senator from California.
Madam President, I also rise today just a week after the Senate confirmed Judge Rita Lynn to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. Now, today I'd like to take a moment to celebrate her confirmation and to share with the people of California a bit more about the outstanding public servant and jurist they've gained on the federal bench. Now, Judge Lynn earned her undergraduate degree from Harvard College and her law degree from Harvard Law School. After clerking on the First Circuit Court of Appeals for Judge Sandra Lynch, she started out her legal career as an associate and later became partner at the firm Morrison Forrester in San Francisco. But in 2014, she left private practice to pursue a career in public service, joining the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California. 4 years later, Governor Brown appointed Judge Lynn to the San Francisco County Superior Court, where she presided over both felony and misdemeanor trials. And at every step, Judge Lynn's career has been guided by her dedication to public service, whether by maintaining an extensive pro bono practice in the early years of her career, or by leaving behind the promise of a very lucrative career in private practice to serve in the Northern District U.S. Attorney's Office. Judge Lynn has proven she has the heart and mind worthy of a federal district judge. And as someone who has lived her entire life with a hearing disability, she also brings a unique perspective from a community not often representative in our nation's federal judiciary. The state of California is now lucky to have a federal district court judge, not only with the judicial qualifications of Judge Lynn, but with the voice, the personal experience, and the passion for public service she brings each and every day. So I'm going to thank my colleagues for confirming her nomination, and I want to congratulate Judge Lynn once again on her confirmation. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination. Calendar item 266, Tara K. McGrath to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California. That the Senate vote on the nomination without intervening action or debate. That if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The junior senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object, I will continue my hold on unanimous consent for Department of Justice nominations so long as I feel like the Department of Justice is being used for politics instead of justice. My arguments on this point have already been made, but I will repeat them for the benefit of anybody who hasn't heard me before. From a Catholic pro-life father of 7 who was arrested in front of his children like a common criminal for exercising his First Amendment rights, to parents who are investigated by the FBI for exercising their First Amendment right of protest at school board meetings, to the leader of the opposition and the likely challenger to President Joe Biden, former President Donald Trump, we have a Department of Justice that has run amok with a focus on politics instead of on justice. Now, my colleagues make some good points. I agree with my colleagues that U.S. attorneys play an important role. I agree with my colleagues that we need a Department of Justice that is fully staffed to do its job. But I don't think the solution to the politicization of the Department of Justice is to let these guys through on a glide path. I think it's to provide proper consent, proper advisement, and proper scrutiny of each one of these nominees, which we can't let them do if we allow them to sail through unanimous consent. Now, I'll continue this hold, but let me just make one final point before I allow my colleague to respond. I'm a new guy, and I recognize that I'm a little naive when it comes to matters of the procedure of the United States Senate. But I've had a lot of jobs in my life, and yesterday we cast 1 vote, and today we have cast 0 votes. The time that we have spent debating whether we should have unanimous consent over these nominations, we could actually use to vote on these nominations and end this charade and call it out for what it is. If we believe that these nominees must go forward, let's just have a vote on it. Allow me to scrutinize them, allow my colleagues to vote them up or down. That is a totally reasonable thing to ask of this chamber and to ask of its leadership. And because of that, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, it's been 2 months since I first came to the floor to call for the confirmation of Tara McGrath, President Biden's nominee to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California. Now, that day in July, my Republican colleague from Ohio chose, as he's done today, to put political gamesmanship over the safety of the American people and to hold her nomination hostage to leverage completely unrelated issues. Now, 2 months later, clearly nothing's changed. And as a result, since early August, the Southern District of California has gone without a confirmed U.S. attorney. And that's despite the fact that a highly qualified candidate was approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee after a confirmation hearing, after the proper vetting and review, and is awaiting a full vote on the Senate floor. Yet, because my Republican colleague has chosen to politicize our Justice Department and the confirmation process and hinder the work of multiple law enforcement offices as they await confirmation of their leadership, law enforcement is now forced to work harder than necessary to keep our communities safe. That includes the senator's own home state of Ohio, where the Northern District is currently without a Senate-confirmed U.S. attorney for the longest stretch in that office's history. And now in my own state, the Southern District of California has become tangled in this political mess. Now, make no mistake, these delays damage the effectiveness of U.S. attorney offices across the country. Like the confirmation of hundreds of our military leaders, these crucial law enforcement nominations are being treated like pawns in their political game. If you truly care about public safety in our communities, if you truly care about enforcing the law, and if you truly care about cracking down on fentanyl and saving American lives, a claim I hear constantly from my colleagues, then confirm Tara McGrath in the Southern District and allow for the swift confirmation of a host of U.S. attorneys that are still being held up. The people of California and the people of the United States deserve better than this. So I call on my colleagues to stop weaponizing the Senate procedures, to confirm Ms. McGrath and all the qualified nominees before us, and take seriously the job that Americans have sent us here to do. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Majority Whip.
Madam President, I rise today to speak about the critical role that U.S. attorneys play in keeping America safe from the scourge of drugs like opioids, fentanyl, gun violence, and violent crime. Why are we on the floor? We're on the floor because one senator has decided to stop the appointment of United States attorneys for the Department of Justice across the United States. He's picked 4 states. One's a pretty red state, Mississippi, California, Ohio, his own home state, and my state of Illinois, to stop the U.S. attorneys from being approved by the United States Senate. This is a pattern. The senator from Alabama, Senator Tuberville, has stopped 300 military officers, career officers, from getting a promotion for more than 6 months. Many of these career officers, women and men, have fought in combat and risked their lives for America. We salute them every Memorial Day. We say that we love our veterans, and I certainly do. I'm sure the senator from Ohio does too. And yet they're being treated so shabbily here in the United States Senate that the leading veterans organization in the United States of America has protested what this Alabama Republican senator is doing. He is stopping 300 of the best, highest-ranked individuals who will lead our military in the world from being approved in the United States Senate for 6 months, more than 6 months. Does he have a specific complaint about any one of them? No. Just categorically, this is his political approach. Let's stop all the military from a promotion. Is that fair to them and their families? I don't think so. Now let's take a look at this situation. The senator from Ohio has decided he's upset with the Department of Justice. How upset is he? Here's what he said. I will hold all Department of Justice nominations. Listen to this. We will grind the Justice Department to a halt. Grind the Justice Department to a halt, he says. Well, let's see. Did the people at the Department of Justice and U.S. attorneys, did they do anything important? Do we really need them? Well, how about starting with the issue of narcotics? 180,000 Americans died from narcotics last year. 180,000. You might know some from your community, your church, your business. 70,000 from fentanyl. Well, let's talk about fentanyl for a minute. What is this narcotic? Well, it's the new and deadliest narcotic on the streets. Let me tell you a story that breaks my heart because I know this couple. They had a daughter who graduated from college. She went to a party in Chicago. Marijuana is legal in Illinois. She decides to smoke a joint at the party. It's been laced with fentanyl and she drops dead on the spot. 22 years of age. Fentanyl is a deadly narcotic. Where does it come from? It comes from Mexico, mainly from Mexico. 2 drug cartels that are sweeping the United States and into Europe with the sale of fentanyl that is killing people right and left. Last year, 70,000 Americans. Who is trying to fight the scourge of fentanyl? The Department of Justice, the same agency that this senator wants to grind to a halt. We're going to declare a timeout. We're going to call the Mexican cartels and say, don't be selling your fentanyl for a while because we're going to make sure that you don't have leadership that you need in your department. How could we do something that irresponsible? Don't stand up and say you're for law and order, you're for law enforcement, and then turn around and stop the appointment of U.S. attorneys who prosecute the criminals who are responsible for the narcotic sales. I came to the floor last week and asked unanimous consent for the Senate to take up and confirm these nominations. Their nominations are Todd G., U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi. If you think this is partisan, let me tell you the whole story. Todd G. is from Mississippi with 2 Republican senators. Both Republican senators approved his appointment as U.S. Attorney. Is this political? Both Republican senators are supporting the nominee that's being held by another Republican senator. It doesn't make sense. Tara McGrath, the request was made by the senator from California just a few moments ago. She wants to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California, eminently qualified, no controversy with her nomination. Rebecca Lutzko. Now this is interesting. U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, the same state as the senator who's now objecting to her. He approved her, she went through the committee, she came out and was reported to the floor, and now she's being held up. Well, let's take a look here. Does Ohio have a narcotics problem? I'm going to make sure I get this right. Oh my. In the last year, Ohio had 5,155 drug overdose deaths, the fourth highest overdose deaths in America. And the U.S. attorney who would be fighting these narcotics with appropriate task force of law enforcement is being held up by which senator? The same state. The senator from Ohio is holding up his own U.S. attorney to prosecute narcotics criminals. And it's not just drugs. In Cleveland, the largest city in the Northern District of Ohio, the number of homicides is up 30% compared to last year. Nearly 90% of all overall homicides in Cleveland this year have involved a firearm. The city has seen a 99% increase in vehicle grand theft, a federal crime, so far in 2023. So to deal with the crime in the streets, to deal with the homicides, the firearm violations, and the increase in vehicle grand theft, you count on one major prosecutor. Who is it? The U.S. attorney. So you have a vacancy in the U.S. attorney's office. The senator from Ohio approves the person to fill the vacancy and then stops her nomination on the floor of the United States Senate. I can't follow his logic unless you're determined to grind the Department of Justice to a halt, even at the expense of the people you represent, the people you were sent here to protect. Don't tell me you're for law and order in your own neighborhood when you stop the nomination of a U.S. attorney with no controversy. It makes no sense. U.S. attorneys are an integral part of our justice system in overseeing important operations that help protect our communities. They're empowered to prosecute all federal criminal offenses. They play a critical role in enforcing the law. In the Northern District of Ohio, for example, the U.S. Attorney's Office led the response to a surge in fatal doses from fentanyl. It brought together doctors, state and local law enforcement, addiction specialists, and other stakeholders, and created the U.S. Attorney's Heroin and Opioid Task Force. This is in the Northern District of Ohio. This U.S. attorney is to fill the spot to lead that. But she's being held up on the calendar by whom? The senator from Ohio. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois also recently secured the conviction of a drug trafficker who attempted to traffic 1 kilogram of fentanyl pills made to look like oxycodone into the state. In addition, the office coordinated with the ATF on a 3-month violent crime reduction initiative in Cleveland that resulted in the arrest of 59 individuals charged with firearms trafficking, narcotics, conspiracy, and other firearms offenses. Are these important? They would be important in Chicago. They would be important in Los Angeles. They're important, I'm sure, in Cleveland and other cities as well. These convictions are trying to keep people safe in their homes and communities and reduce violent crime. The lead prosecutor, the lead federal prosecutor, is a U.S. attorney. It's a vacant position we're trying to fill with a person who demonstrated competence to take it over. And who is holding it up but the senator from Ohio? I don't understand it. When he ran for office, Senator Vance argued that he would, quote, fight the criminals and not the cops. Well, take a look at what's happening here. In this situation, the people that we need to fight these criminals, the prosecutors, are being held up by the senator before they can be voted on the floor. He has pledged to be, quote, tough on crime and to support our brave law enforcement officers. In fact, just this May, he introduced a resolution in the Senate saying, quote, he supported law enforcement officers of the United States. His resolution said the Senate highly respects and values law enforcement officers of the United States and greatly appreciates all that they do to protect and serve. The senator's resolution then calls on, quote, all levels of government to ensure that law enforcement officers receive the support and resources needed to keep our communities safe. Support and resources are great, but give them the job. The job's still vacant because the senator is withholding his approval for them to move forward. I say to my colleagues, Reread the resolution you introduced last May and take your own advice. Give these U.S. attorneys' offices the leadership they need to keep their community safe. Now I'd like to engage the senator, if he doesn't mind, in a question. I listened carefully to what you said earlier in objecting to the U.S. Attorney for California, Southern District of California. And what is your position, if you would mind stating it, in terms of a vote on that nomination? Would you?
My position is that we should have a full Senate vote on each one of these judicial nominations, of these Justice Department nominations. My position is that we shouldn't let them sail through unanimous consent.
So you want a record vote for each U.S. attorney?
I'd like a record vote for all Justice Department nominations moving forward, yes.
Do you understand that before President Biden was elected, that was common practice, a unanimous consent request was all that was necessary to approve a U.S. attorney?
I don't know that, but I believe my colleague from Illinois that that's how it worked. But what's different now compared to then is that we have a Department of Justice that's been weaponized against its political opponents. I understand much of what you said, Senator Durbin, and I appreciate your passion for this issue, and my heart goes out to your friends who lost somebody to fentanyl. I, too, know a lot of people who have lost a loved one or a child to a fentanyl overdose. But what will facilitate effective administration of justice in this country is for the American people to see the Department of Justice as focused on justice instead of politics. And that's what this is fundamentally about. Do we have a Department of Justice that has the trust of the American people? Senator Durbin, I don't think that any of my Democratic colleagues could look at public polling and not admit that the Department of Justice has lost a substantial amount of public confidence just in the last year. How can we have effective administration of justice if we fill the Department of Justice with people who are perceived, rightfully or not, as political actors by the people who receive that justice?
Is the senator aware? Well, I'm not going to ask this question. I know you know the answer as well as I do, and I'll just state generally. The people who were involved in the prosecution of former President Trump were attorneys appointed to that position by President Trump.
Okay.
And special counsel, separate and apart from the Department of Justice, independently making those decisions. Your decision to stop U.S. attorneys from taking these jobs means that they will not be even able, in a position, to be able to prosecute individuals of either political party who are guilty of criminal wrongdoing. Do you understand that?
Well, I have two responses to that, Senator. First of all, you appreciate as well as I do that we've had 0 votes today. I don't control how many people we vote on. In fact, I believe you do under the Senate procedures and Senate rules. If it's so important to confirm these folks, bring them up to the floor for a vote.
So I'm going to make a unanimous consent request consistent with that statement that you just made. And I'll listen to it carefully. I hope you, because it's first, I don't know if you've been given a copy, but I want to make sure you understand it.
Yeah, as a senator from Illinois, I assume knows well, I'm not the only person that's holding some of these nominations. I'm happy to grant consent to vote on the ones where I'm the only hold, but where I have other colleagues, I can't release the hold for other colleagues.
No, and you're not expected to, but if individual senators have an objection to moving forward on a nomination and they know a unanimous consent request is going to be made on the floor, it's their responsibility to be present physically. You can't mail it in.
Senator, I'm here representing my colleagues. They object. I'm not going to release their hold on their behalf.
So even if you got your way, even if you had a roll call vote, which you've asked for twice now, you're still not going to allow us to move to fill these vacancies for U.S. attorneys, even in Ohio?
Senator Durbin, you know the Senate procedures better than I do, and you could certainly bring these folks up for a vote later today, and all of us would have to vote for them. Why don't you do that?
That's what I'm going to request right now, and so you can decide whether you're going to go along with it or object. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Republican Leader, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations: calendar number 129, 314, 315, 266, that there be two minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form on each nomination, that upon the use or yielding back of the time of the Senate will proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume a legislative session.
The junior senator from Ohio.
As the senator knows well, my colleagues have been given no notice. They have no sense that this is being done, and I'm not going to release their objection on their behalf. As the senator from Illinois knows well, I'm happy to release my own objection, but I'm not going to release theirs. Therefore, I object on their behalf.
Objection is heard.
So there he got it. I just gave him what he asked for, and he said it wasn't enough. He has to have every other senator come to the floor and agree to this. Let me say this is a unanimous consent request for 4 U.S. attorneys who have gone through the Senate Judiciary Committee, which Senator Padilla and I serve on. They went through that bipartisan committee, and they've been reported to the floor. This is customary, ordinary. There's nothing controversial about these individuals, but still in all, not good enough. He's objected to even having a vote later in the day on the very nominations that he asked to vote for earlier. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to vote no against these nominees under any condition, make it clear. To say you want to clear it with every other senator, they've been given notice of this unanimous consent request. They could be here on the floor if they wanted to object personally. To my knowledge, this junior senator from Ohio is the only one objecting, and it's a shame he is, because these U.S. attorneys are needed desperately in California, Mississippi, Ohio, and my home state of Illinois. To think of what we're going through to the point where a congressman who is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee came to Chicago to hold a hearing this week to outline how much trouble we have with violent crime. We do have problems with violent crime. We certainly need a U.S. attorney, which is one of the persons up for this nomination, to do her best to make sure that we have a safer community in Chicago. How can she do it if she can't clear the Senate floor? I hope the senator will get it straight as to what exactly he's trying to achieve here. If he wanted a roll call vote, I just offered it to him, and it wasn't good enough. I'm going to be returning regularly to the floor to make this unanimous consent request. Sadly, during the period of time that we debate this, crime will continue to be committed in Ohio, in Illinois, in Mississippi, in California, and many instances could have been avoided if the Senate, on a regular, with dispatch approach, decided to move these nominations forward as they have been traditionally. To say that you want the Department of Justice to grind to a halt in the United States of America, come on. That's the kind of statement you make in a speech and come back later and say, well, I didn't mean that exactly. Certainly no one means that exactly. We don't want the Department of Justice to stop its fight against narcotics and fentanyl in the United States that are claiming thousands of lives. And slowing down that process here on the Senate floor is just unacceptable. I yield the floor.
The junior senator from California.
I recognize that my colleague from Ohio will not speak on behalf of other Republican members, but I would respectfully ask if he would lift his hold on the nomination of Tara McGrath to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California. The senator from Ohio to respond to my question.
I'm sorry.
Respectfully ask if my colleague from Ohio would lift his hold on the nomination of Tara McGrath to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California.
So
Yes or no?
Madam President.
The junior senator from
Thank
Ohio.
you. Senator Padilla, I'm happy to do that. I'm the only person holding 266. As I've said repeatedly, I want these nominations to have a vote to be scrutinized by the full Senate, and I'm the only senator holding 266. That's Ms. McGrath. I'm happy to release the hold there and not release the hold on the unanimous consent request, but certainly to bring this before the full Senate for a vote. The senator from Illinois is apparently hell-bent on coming before the chamber every single week to litigate what I think and believe is a corrupt and politicized Department of Justice. He makes much every single time we engage in this exercise about the fact that the Department of Justice has never had this kind of hold policy placed on it before. I agree, this is a new and unique circumstance. What is much different about the Trump administration Department of Justice and the Merrick Garland, Joe Biden Department of Justice is Donald Trump never tried to throw his political opponents in prison. This is crazy banana republic stuff, and I will not stand for it. I will continue to hold these nominations. I will continue to push back against the politicization of justice. And finally, let me just say, what I have asked for and what I will continue to ask for is that these nominees go through regular order. The senator knows well what everybody else knows, that as one senator, I cannot prevent the confirmation of these nominees, however much I might like to. What I can do is force us to go through regular order. I ask for a vote, Senator Durbin. You can invoke cloture. We can vote on cloture. We can then do a recorded vote. That is what we have done with many, many nominees, and because of the corruption of Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, it's what I ask with this nominee and with any in the future. Because of that, Madam President, I object.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the Senate's need to swiftly confirm pending U.S. Attorney nominees. 2 days ago, I came to the floor to request unanimous consent for the Senate to take up and confirm 4 pending U.S. Attorney nominations that were being held up by one United States Senator, the junior senator from Ohio, Senator Vance. And 2 days ago, he said, and I quote, "My position is we should have a full Senate vote on each of these Justice Department nominations." He also said, quote, "If it's so important to confirm these folks, bring them to a floor for a vote." But now that's exactly what he is attempting to prevent today. For decades, the Senate confirmed U.S. Attorney nominees of both political parties by voice vote, or what is called unanimous consent in the Senate, after they had been reported by the Judiciary Committee. Before the beginning of the Biden administration, the Senate had not required a roll call vote in confirmation of a U.S. attorney since 1975, almost 50 years. In fact, during the Trump administration, Senate Democrats allowed every one of Trump's U.S. attorney nominees, all 85, to move through the committee and be confirmed by a voice vote, unanimous consent. Let me tell you, as a Democrat in those days, I knew what I was getting with these U.S. attorneys. Working for Jeff Sessions, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and William Barr, I knew what was going to happen. But I respected the tradition of the Senate. Now Senate Republicans have decided to change the rules and are blocking the confirmation of these critical law enforcement officers. I've faced this before. Republicans have said they're going to object to U.S. attorneys, but fortunately had better thoughts on the subject as time progressed. Now this year, the senator from Ohio has proudly announced that he will, I want to quote him exactly here, "I will hold all DOJ nominations. We will grind the Justice Department to a halt." Grind the Justice Department to a halt. U.S. attorneys are too important to be used as political pawns in a national debate. They lead our nation's effort to prosecute violent criminals. Don't tell me that you're for law and order, but you want to stop criminal prosecutors from being appointed to the job. They lead our nation's effort to protect our communities from drug trafficking. I quoted some numbers the other day about drug trafficking and fentanyl deaths in the state of Ohio, the state where one of these U.S. attorneys would be going to work in the Cleveland area. Ohio ranks 4th in the nation in narcotics deaths. And for the Senate to respond by one senator from Ohio stopping the appointment of a criminal prosecutor to go after these cartels and drug gangs is not explainable. So I offered Senator Vance the opportunity to allow us to schedule confirmation votes on all pending U.S. attorneys. I want to read exactly what he said from the congressional record, which of course is the permanent record of the Senate and will be read by future generations. This is on September 27th, 2 days ago. Here is what Senator Vance said. "I'm the new guy, and I recognize I'm a little naive when it comes to matters of the procedures of the United States Senate. But I've had a lot of jobs in my life, and yesterday we passed 1 vote, and today we have passed 0 votes. The time that we have spent debating whether we should have unanimous consent over these nominations, we could actually use to vote on these nominations and end this charade and call it for what it is. If we believe that these nominees must go forward, let's just have a vote on it. Allow me to scrutinize them. Allow my colleagues to vote them up or down. That is totally a reasonable thing to do, to ask of this chamber. and to ask of this leadership, and because of that, I object. Well, I accepted his challenge. I took his words to be heartfelt and truthful, that he wanted votes. And so today we had 2 votes on 2 of the U.S. attorneys, considered by the Senate, exactly what the senator from Ohio asked for. But there are 2 more on the calendar that he held up initially. He said on the floor during our debate, these weren't people he was necessarily objecting to, but somebody else in the Senate might be objecting to them. I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted to give him the time to find out who that might be. It turns out there is no one else. He's the only objector, even though he said on the record, in the congressional record, that all he wanted was a roll call vote on these nominees. Well, he's going to get a chance to keep his word that he put in the congressional record, and he's going to get a chance to have the vote that he asked for. Only fair. We've done it for the first 2, we'll do it for the others. Let me repeat again, Senator Vance has not only refused to move these nominees by voice vote, as the Senate has done for decades, he is now backtracking on his own words from 2 days ago and refusing even to allow roll calls on these nominees. This kind of obstructionism is becoming commonplace, I'm afraid. If you take a look at this executive calendar that we have here, there are pages and pages of military officers who have served this country nobly and honorably, who are asking for a simple promotion they're entitled to. They're being held up by another Republican senator who doesn't want to move forward on this, holding them for 6 months from promotion. Is this the new way of doing business under the MAGA regime? I hope not. Rebecca Lutzko was nominated to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. She's a longtime federal prosecutor who has served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio for nearly 18 years. As a federal prosecutor, she handles cases involving prescription drug trafficking, gun crimes, and corruption. Important? You bet it is. April Perry, nominated to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, significant experience in the private sector and as a federal prosecutor. She served the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois for over a decade, where she handled narcotics, gang violence, public corruption, and fraud. Important? You bet it is. Ms. Perry specialized in child exploitation prosecutions, spent 6 years as the office's Project Safe Childhood Coordinator. Are you concerned, as I am, about the exploitation of children, the trafficking of children, the terrible sexual abuse that's taking place on the internet? Do you think we ought to have the Department of Justice on that case? Of course we should. 1 week ago, Senator Vance was quoted as saying, "My objection is not to the specific qualifications of these particular individuals that have been nominated." So here he is, not complaining about any of their resumes or capacity to do the job and do it effectively. His concern, and he said it publicly, so I think I'm going to accurately quote him, his concern that his former president of the United States was indicted. And he's very concerned about a Department of Justice that would even let that happen. For goodness sakes, things happen during the Department of Justice activity under the administration of Donald Trump that I objected to. But I didn't stop the appointment of U.S. attorneys under Trump. I didn't stop the people in law enforcement who were keeping us safe in our communities. These are eminently qualified individuals. And clearly, I'm asking Senator Vance, in good faith, keep your word. What you said in the congressional record is a matter of record, and you should stand by your word. And for that reason, I make the following motion. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations on block, calendar 314 and 315, that the Senate vote on the nominations on block without intervening action or debate, that if confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Ohio.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, let me address a few of my distinguished colleague from Illinois' comments. First of all, while it is true that my hold policy regarding the Department of Justice is not focused on any particular nominee, I do think this particular nominee is particularly troublesome, and let me just talk about why. Ms. Perry is a figure who served as Chief Ethics Officer in the Cook County State Attorney's Office during the Jussie Smollett hate crime hoax. We may remember that from a few years ago. This is when a person accused people of engaging in a false hate crime, took a ton of state resources to investigate it, and it turned out the entire thing was fraudulent, meant to gin up publicity for Mr. Smollett. Now, everyone pretty much agrees that Ms. Fox, who was the state attorney at the time, engaged in some pretty unethical behavior, and Mrs. Perry effectively rubber-stamped it. Is this the sort of person who could be trusted to impartially administer justice in the Biden-Garland Department of Justice? I don't think that she is. So I'll be voting against her nomination, and I also object to giving a streamlined confirmation process for her. Now, the senator from Illinois is apparently hell-bent on coming before the chamber every single week to litigate what I think and believe is a corrupt and politicized Department of Justice. He makes much, and he makes much every single time we engage in this exercise, about the fact that the Department of Justice has never had this kind of hold policy placed on it before. I agree, this is a new and unique circumstance. What is much different about the Trump administration Department of Justice and the Merrick Garland, Joe Biden Department of Justice is Donald Trump never tried to throw his political opponents in prison. This is crazy banana republic stuff, and I will not stand for it. I will continue to hold these nominations. I will continue to push back against the politicization of justice. And finally, let me just say, what I have asked for and what I will continue to ask for is that these nominees go through regular order. The senator knows well what everybody else knows, that as one senator, I cannot prevent the confirmation of these nominees, however much I might like to. What I can do is force us to go through regular order. I ask for a vote, Senator Durbin. You can invoke cloture. We can vote on cloture. We can then do a recorded vote. That is what we have done with many, many nominees, and because of the corruption of Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, it's what I ask with this nominee and with any in the future. Because of that, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, it is interesting now we've got a new argument. Previously he said, I have no objection to these nominees. I just don't like the process. I want to vote. I said, fine, you can have a vote. Now when we ask for a vote on the two remaining nominees for U.S. Attorney, he's finding fault with them as individuals. I hope he'll take the time, and I know he's a fair person, to read the record about what Ms. Perry did when she worked for State's Attorney Kim Fox. It is true there was a controversial case before her office, and that she was the Chief Ethics Officer in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. She served in that office at the time the Jussie Smollett matter was being investigated. But Ms. Perry's role as Chief Ethics Officer was limited to recommending that the State's Attorney Fox recuse herself and the office seek appointment of a special prosecutor. Notably, Ms. Perry resigned from that office a few weeks after the prosecutors initially agreed to drop the charges against Mr. Smollett. She has never been implicated, and to throw her name into this situation is unfair. I'm sure the senator from Ohio does not want to do that. So listen to what he suggests. I'm glad that the Senator Reid's on the floor, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Sound familiar? Here we have a group of people, nominees that have come before us, have been considered throughout history in a routine, unanimous consent way. And now the senator from Ohio says we're going to go one by one and have a cloture motion on each one of them. You and I both know, having been here a few years, what that means. It's physically impossible, whether we're talking about officers in the military or U.S. attorney nominees, to say we'll just stack them up on the calendar and go through cloture votes. And it's unnecessary. If we didn't single out a single U.S. attorney nominee in the Trump administration, but gave voice votes to all 85, it's an indication of an effort at goodwill and bipartisanship, even when we're suspicious of what the political agenda may be of that department. To hold some of these people, the U.S. attorney for his own home state, the city of Cleveland, to hold this person to this kind of scrutiny that goes way beyond anything that we usually have been involved in is unfair to her, and it's unfair to the process and the system. I am going to return to the floor. The senator from Ohio and I are going to be pretty familiar fixtures on this floor, because if he says something in the congressional record as he did, all he wants a roll call, and we offer a roll call just as I did, and he denies it over and over, he has some explaining to do. And if he thinks that standing up for the MAGA order of process here is something the American people admire, I beg you to differ with him. We understand that the Department of Justice has an important job to do to keep us safe in our communities. And for someone to say, a senator from the United States Senate to say, I will hold all DOJ nominations. We will grind the Justice Department to a halt. Really? That's your agenda? And that's why you came to the Senate? If the Department of Defense is being ground to a halt because of the promotion of officers, and to do the same thing in the Department of Justice, and we're facing a government shutdown over MAGA members of the House of Representatives, the American people have a good picture, a good photograph of the future if we go down problems and challenges from federal law. Whether we're fighting fentanyl epidemics, whether we're fighting those who would undermine this country, many who would cheat and steal at the expense of others, we count on professional prosecutors to make those decisions. We go through a process here where a president will name a potential U.S. attorney. That's not the end of the story. The attorney's name is then submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chair. And then it goes through a rigorous bipartisan process, an investigation of each one of these nominees. Until they clear both sides of the table, Democrats and Republicans, the nominees don't move. Once having cleared, they are then put up for approval before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Traditionally, that was virtually the end of the story. The name would hit the calendar name would be called, approved, and the person would move into action. Under the previous president, Donald Trump, there was a lot of controversy, political controversy associated with all sorts of issues. So you have to wonder, out of the 85 U.S. attorney nominees proposed by President Donald Trump, how many of them ran into an obstacle or being stopped on the Senate floor by Democrats for partisan reason? The answer, none, not one. Despite all the controversy of the Trump administration, the feeling was that it was only fair to these men and women asking to serve our nation as representatives of the Department of Justice to give them that chance if they cleared the bipartisan background process. They did, we gave our approval, they served across the nation. But unfortunately, we've come into a new era. U.S. attorneys, law enforcement officers who lead our nation to prosecute violent criminals and protect our communities from drug traffickers, gun violence, terrorism, and so many other things, are still central to our system of justice. I've emphasized that the U.S. Attorney's offices in the Northern District of Ohio, that would be Cleveland, and the Northern District of Illinois, that would be Chicago, undertake important investigations and prosecutions that keep our communities safe. The state of Ohio, like many others, suffers from a scourge of fentanyl trafficking. We know about this deadly narcotic. It's a killer. It is a fourth in the nation for drug overdose deaths. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio oversees the area's response to fatal overdoses from fentanyl through the U.S. Attorney's Heroin and Opioid Task Force. I would guess many Ohioans would want to know why that task force now is waiting for Senate-confirmed leadership. In my home state of Illinois, over the last 2 years, the Chicago Police Department has recovered more than 10,000 firearms, 10,000 a year from various criminal investigations. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois is responsible for coordinating the efforts with all the law enforcement agencies in the Chicago Firearms Trafficking Strike Force. My constituents can't understand why one senator from another state is blocking the confirmation of one U.S. Attorney candidate in Illinois, April Perry, who's been found to be highly qualified not only by the White House, but by a bipartisan investigative committee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. April Perry is well qualified for this job. She would like to be on the job and should have been weeks ago, making it safer to live in my state. Another point I've made before is the irony that the senator who is blocking these two nominees is considering this a tough-on-crime position. Tough on crime, when you refuse to put a person in the role of prosecutor who's supposed to put these criminals behind bars. When he ran for the Senate, my colleague from Ohio pledged to, quote, fight the criminals, not the cops. That's his quote. He argued that Americans will not be safe if, quote, politicians keep attacking police officers instead of violent criminals. I just have to tell him his strategy of stopping 2 leading U.S. attorneys, one in his state and the state of Illinois, is the best news the criminals have had in a long time. The same man who pledged to fight the cops now proudly brags that he wants to, quote, grind the Department of Justice to a halt. I'm not making that up, and he's not denied it. He said his goal is to grind the U.S. Department of Justice to a halt. Listen to this headline from a recent article in Newsmax, quote, Senator Vance to Newsmax, blocking DOJ nominees makes AG's job harder. We want to make the Attorney General's job harder when it comes to prosecuting drug criminals? Is that what this is all about? I've said it before and say it again. Senator Vance needs to read a resolution he proposed in this body earlier this year and take his own advice. He should give law enforcement officers the support and resources they need rather than trying to score political points by making their jobs harder. Unlike me, Senator Vance doesn't need to worry about sounding like a broken record. Each time I come to the floor to ask for unanimous consent, he offers a different explanation for why he's blocking the confirmation of these highly qualified nominees. First, he claimed he was punishing the Justice Department for what he falsely called, quote, unprecedented political prosecution of former President Trump. As I pointed out, this is a weak excuse for hamstringing law enforcement, considering the former president has now been indicted 4 separate times on 91 different counts and continues to threaten judges, prosecutors, jurors, and witnesses. Senator Vance also previously stated here on the Senate floor, quote, and I quote, it's in the congressional record, my objection is not specific to the qualifications of the particular individuals that have been nominated. He said, I want to make it clear that this, in reference to both Ms. Lutzko in Ohio and Ms. Perry in Illinois. In response, I offered the junior senator from Ohio the opportunity to keep his promise to support law enforcement by allowing us to schedule confirmation votes on these pending U.S. attorneys, exactly what he said he wanted on the record in the Senate. He looked me in the eye and agreed with me. He released his objection to both Ms. Lutzko and Ms. Perry on the condition that we hold roll call votes on them, which I agreed to. And then, seemingly overnight, he decided that he actually does object to even holding confirmation votes on these nominees. He then claimed that, quote, expecting us to vote on cloture is not too much to ask. I was surprised to hear that. It was a new wrinkle in his argument, considering that just last month, the junior senator from Ohio was on the Senate floor attempting to force the Senate to skip a cloture vote on one of his bills. I look forward to hearing what his new argument may be today. If he is trying to punish those who are in the process of prosecuting a former president of the United States, what is his retribution when it comes to the state of Georgia? We now have so many counts naming the former president for wrongdoing, and we have 4 of the people who've been accused who have pled guilty so far in that process. Does he have a special agenda now when it comes to the state of Georgia to determine whether or not there's going to be some retribution, going to grind to halt the system of justice in that state? So we've reached a point where it's hard to explain. Senator Tuberville of Alabama is stopping military promotions of deserving women and men who have risked their lives in service to America. Another Republican senator is stopping ambassadorial positions being filled. And now this senator has decided we have enough criminal prosecutors in America to take care of crime, we don't need more. Well, we certainly need these 2 and many more doing a professional job. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Republican leader, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, calendar number 314 and 315. There'll be 2 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form on each nomination, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President, with respect to my colleague from Illinois. I've heard a number of arguments that I've somehow changed my tune. And what I would say is I haven't changed my tune. The senator from Illinois keeps making different arguments, and I keep needing to respond to each one of them. But to restate my fundamental problem here, I will note that one of the consistent criticisms of my hold on Department of Justice nominees is that this is unprecedented, that when Donald Trump was president, we let these nominees sail through, and now I'm holding up these nominations to the Department of Justice. I would counter that what is unprecedented is not the hold policy, but the Department of Justice attempting to throw its political opponents in jail. Now, much is made about the political prosecution of Donald Trump. I think that is unjustified, and it is frankly scary in the world's greatest democracy to have the political opposition leader prosecuted by the sitting president. That's pretty weird. Not something that happens a whole lot in the United States of America, and thank God for that, but you don't even need to make it about the current president. You can run down any number of everyday conservatives, people who have been prosecuted, investigated, harassed by this Department of Justice. It should be enforcing the law. It should leave the politics to this chamber and to the electoral process. Mr. President, I will continue to object so long as the Department of Justice conducts its business in a highly politicized way. If Merrick Garland or anyone else is listening, please get back to the business of enforcing the law, get out of politics, and then, and only then, will I release my hold policy. Because of that, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois.
last week in my home area of Chicago, a 6-year-old Palestinian boy answered the door and was stabbed over and over again until he died. And then the assailant went into the other room and tried to kill his mother. The question is whether is this a hate crime because of his Palestinian origin? Does it deserve an investigation? Does it sound in America like this is the sort of thing we want an answer to? Who would we turn to for that investigation? The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois. But the senator from Ohio, because of his hurt feelings over the indictment of former President Trump by many others, has decided to say, in my region of the country, we will have no U.S. attorney. We'll leave the position vacant. Not because the person isn't qualified to take it over, but because he is hurt and believes he wants to protest over the idea of holding a former president accountable. Obviously, in his mind, former presidents are above the law, not in mine, and not in any democracy. I don't know if former President Trump is guilty of any charges. We have a system of laws and law enforcement to reach that conclusion. But in the meantime, whether it's a hate crime in a suburb of Chicago, or drug crimes that are claiming lives every single night in every single neighborhood in our nation, how can we stand here in good conscience and say we want to grind the Department of Justice to a halt? That is exactly what he said over and over again. Grind the Department of Justice to a halt. To prove what? To prove what about this nation? We deserve the opportunity to be protected by the agencies of government we've appointed. And the men and women who are willing to sacrifice their time, their skills to serve that purpose and keep us safer deserve better treatment than what's happening on the Senate floor. I wish I could say this is a unique experience. It has become a pattern. A House of Representatives which goes for 21, 22 days trying to find a leader on the Republican side of the aisle. Military appointments, hundreds of them, of men and women qualified, serving our military, risking their lives, whose nominations are being held up on the Senate floor by one Republican senator. The idea that we're holding back the possibility of appointing ambassadors in parts of the world where war is imminent and underway and could drag the United States into conflict if we're not careful. To take that position that we want to stop government, whether it's in the Department of Defense, in their promotion policy, whether it's in the Department of State, in the representatives around the world, or whether it's in the Department of Justice, is shameful. This is not public service. This is a political errand. I wish it would come to an end soon, and I wish the senator who is new to this body would think twice about whether this is how he wants to write his record in the United States Senate. I yield the floor.
Democratic Whip.
Madam President, I rise to discuss the Senate's urgent need to confirm nominations of Rebecca Lutzko to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio and April Perry to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. On 5 previous occasions, I have come to the floor of the Senate to request unanimous consent to move these nominees forward. Each time, the junior senator from Ohio has objected. He campaigned for the Senate claiming he would be tough on crime. But now that he's here, he proudly brags that he wants to, quote, grind the Department of Justice to a halt. These communities desperately need these nominees in place. There are 85 U.S. attorneys across the United States. Under President Donald Trump, we approved all 85 without a record roll call. Voice vote. It was an understanding that we would debate the issue of an attorney general. When it came to the U.S. attorneys in individual cities and states, it was too important for us to slow these down with additional procedural requirements on the floor. And so we do background checks on these U.S. attorney nominees on a bipartisan basis, and once they clear, we add them to the calendar. That's when the junior senator from Ohio stepped in and decided he would try to stop the process. How important is the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio that he is holding up? The entire nation has been impacted by the opioid epidemic, but Ohio has been especially hard hit. In recent years, fentanyl has been involved in 80% of unintentional drug overdose deaths within the state of Ohio. Last year, federal law enforcement officials and local partners in Ohio seized over 87,000 fentanyl-laden tablets in a span of less than 4 months. And over the course of 1 year, from April 22 to April 23, more than 5,000 Ohioans lost their lives to drug overdoses. 5,000. Let that sink in. On average, every day, 14 Ohio families lose a loved one to drugs. How important is it to have a U.S. attorney in Ohio and in Illinois working on this drug crisis that claims so many lives every single day? Can we really make an excuse that we have some political petulance at work on the floor of the Senate that stops us from putting a prosecutor in place to stop this drug trafficking? The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio plays a significant role in holding drug traffickers accountable. Last month, this office secured a 320-month sentence for a Toledo-based man who was a local drug distributor for the Sinaloa cartel and had helped traffic fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine into the state of Ohio. In addition, federal prosecutors found this defendant had engaged in sex trafficking and secured a 140-month sentence after he was convicted. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office coordinated this with both the Toledo Metro Drug Task Force and Toledo Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Task Force. That's what an efficient U.S. Attorney's Office does to keep the people of Ohio and Illinois safe. Why in the world would any senator stand up and object to a U.S. attorney prosecutor who is working to stop this drug trafficking across his state? Well, the senator from Ohio explained it. He is upset, Madam President. He is upset that the U.S. Department of Justice, through a special counsel, would actually consider indicting the former President of the United States. And because he's upset, and he calls it weaponization, he's going to make sure that in his own state, there's not a federal prosecutor doing the job that should be done to stop narcotics. And in my state of Illinois, the same thing. This is unprecedented. It's not happened in the history of the Senate. You can be upset, petulant, worried, hate it that a friend of yours in politics has been indicted, but to hold that up against the people of Ohio and the families that are dying on such a regular basis from these narcotics, that is short-sighted. That does not really reach the level that we as senators should aspire to. And so, Madam President, I make the following request. I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the majority leader with Republican leaders' consultation, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the nominations calendar number 314 and 315. 2 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form on each nomination. That upon the use or yielding back a time, the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. That no further motions be in order. That the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate then resume the legislative session.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object. The senator from Illinois has made 2 comments that I'd like to respond to. First of all, I think it takes a special amount of gall to be from Joe Biden's political party and to complain about the fentanyl crisis that is ravaging not just Ohio, but the entire country, because it is Joe Biden's border policies that have invited this fentanyl into our country at record levels. And I heard a briefing from the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol today that confirmed that very fact. Second of all, the senator said something I actually agree with, that this this hold policy that I've implemented on Department of Justice nominees is unprecedented. He mentions that we have in the past, this body, before I got here, approved a number of Department of Justice nominees through unanimous consent. What the senator from Illinois doesn't mention, Madam President, is that in that time, when these nominations sailed through unanimous consent, the Department of Justice was not trying to throw the political rival of the President of the United States in prison. I object to this because we are living in a banana republic where the president is using his Department of Justice to go after his chief political rival, the person he will appear on the ballot with in about a year. If the Department of Justice will use these nominations for law instead of politics, I am happy to end this hold policy. But so long as the Department of Justice uses its nominations and uses its personnel to go after its political opponents from the President of the United States on down, I will object. Because of that, Madam President, I do object.
Objection heard.
Madam President, so on average, every day, 14 Ohio families lose a loved one to drugs. The explanation? We want to send a message to the Department of Justice. We want to keep the U.S. Attorney off the job to try to attack this narcotics epidemic. It just doesn't make sense. How can you explain to the people of Ohio and Illinois that you're trying to get some way to make it even on political grounds and at their expense? For goodness sakes, for the sake of your families in your own home state, give these U.S. attorneys a chance to fight to make life safer for these families.